Okay, everybody, let's get started. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you today for the second of our series of webinars for parents, Talk at Home. For those of you who joined us last week, welcome back. It's great to see you again. For our new participants, if it's your first time joining us, welcome. It's lovely to have your interest in what we're doing. We're absolutely thrilled to tell you that last week we had over 1,500 views of our webinar. People joined us from Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and even as far away as Denmark. Now you'll all notice that your microphone has been muted. This is to avoid any background noise coming into the webinar. So your microphone will stay that way throughout the webinar. However, you will notice that there is a chat function available for you. So please do pop in any of the questions or thoughts that you have along the way. And sometimes our presenters might ask you to contribute. Okay, so let's get started with today's webinar. Our topic today for our second webinar is listen, listen, listen. And in today's webinar, we really hope to focus on those listening skills that we introduced to you last week. So that's going to be our focus for our webinar this week. Listen, listen, listen. As usual, I'll be joining you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Donna Sporandio. I'm an early intervention teacher, a teacher of the deaf, and a certified auditory verbal therapist. And I'm lucky enough to have been able to work in the Southeast Asia region for the last few years. We'll be joined by my colleague Rebecca Claridge, who you met last week. Rebecca is a speech and language pathologist and a certified auditory verbal therapist. And we're very lucky today to have our guest speaker join us. She's Dr. Anisha Preto. Anisha is an ASHA certified speech language therapist and certified auditory verbal therapist. Anisha has a PhD in the development of spoken language in children with hearing loss. And Anisha is also a fluent cued speech user. So now it's going to be my pleasure to hand over to Anisha to get us started with today's webinar. Thanks, Anisha.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank the staff, local staff for MED-EL in Southeast Asia, as well as Donna and Rebecca for organizing this event and inviting me to be here with you today. I'd like to thank you as well for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. So before we get into this week's topic, I'd like to see how things have gone with you since the last session. Please feel free to type into the chat any experiences you've had using some of the strategies that were discussed during the last session. For example, have you tried to reduce background noise in your home? Perhaps you used the Decibel 10 app to do that. Have you worked on coming closer to your child or talking more? And have you found an interesting or creative way to keep your child's ears or hearing technology on while their eyes are open? Maybe you've even had the opportunity to use the free resource. So please feel free to share those. We'd just like to check in and see how things are going with you. It's always useful when individuals can share what they've learned with others. I think we all can learn from that and find that really helpful.
Alicia, we did have a question that came through to us by email. I wonder if you might address.
Sure.
A few people have asked us about the distance that they should be from their child's microphone. So they're a little bit worried that they really need to be very, very close, or is it that they need to be more natural in how they work with their children? Can you please address that question for us?
So it's like you said, we want to consider the communication context. And when we're thinking about the distance in particular, we need to remember that with any hearing technology, the microphone can provide some feedback if we're too close to it. So I generally try to keep a distance of at least about 6 inches, a good hand's width from that microphone, even when I am trying to come closer. Remember that every time you double the distance away from your child's microphone, that your voice will naturally fall in volume by 6 dB, okay? So you don't want to be too far, you want to come closer so we can provide the optimal signal.
Okay, super.
All
Thank you.
All right, so perhaps you'll share some ideas as they come up to your mind during our discussion today. With that said, let's go ahead and begin. So what's our goal for today? First, we're going to touch on the importance of listening. And then we'll give you some strategies that will help you gain and keep your child's attention. And finally, we'll finish up with some ideas that will help you use the auditory potential provided by your child's hearing technology to maximize their listening development. So that's our game plan for today. In our last session, these 3 concepts of hearing, listening, and talking were introduced. Now, if you have any questions about your child's hearing, we want to hear from you. We have access to MED-EL and Hear Live staff in Southeast Asia, but also globally. So we welcome questions from anywhere. This week, we're going to focus on the listening aspects. You may remember from the last session that we discussed hearing as being a passive sense. For individuals with typical hearing, that sound is being transmitted from the ear to the brain all the time, even while you sleep. With listening, we're recruiting in another aspect, the brain. The brain is involved in this aspect. And that's really important because we know that listening development begins before talking, and it's a central piece in this process that you see here. For typically developing children, listening begins even before they're born. So by the 5th month of pregnancy, most babies begin to hear within utero. Now, that's something to think about because their listening journey has begun even before they're born. With a child who receives access to sound after they're fitted with hearing technology, that's where their listening journey begins. And therapeutically and through the work of caregivers and professionals working together, we have to actively promote to build those listening skills. We know that every moment of listening counts because there is this gap or delay, and we want to improve the listening skills. So that's why we say when your child's eyes are open, we like their hearing technology to be on and working well. Simply put, eyes open, ears on. Why is that important? Well, we need to think a little bit about what's happening when the brain doesn't have access to sound. You'll remember I said that listening involves the work of the brain. The brain is a remarkable structure. It organizes itself to process all the different types of sensory input your child receives, whether it's visual, touch, or something else. You'll see here in the image of the brain that we have that there's a green tick mark where the auditory information in typically developing listeners is processed in the auditory cortex. That happens on both sides of the brain. When your child receives access to sound through their hearing technology, and when it's well and appropriately fitted, then that information can stimulate that area of the brain. If they don't receive access to sound in a timely manner, then the brain doesn't sit there idle. Other centers of the brain that might be responsible for processing information about what your child sees or feels may use that auditory cortex for those processes. So when we have a hearing implant, hearing aid, or other type of technology providing new auditory information to the brain, we have to teach that brain how to use that information actively and not shut it out. You and I, as typical listeners, we hear the sounds around us, but we may not always attend to them. Still, we'll recognize, for example, that the sound over there may be a car horn, or there's keys jingling in the door, or footsteps on the carpet. We recognize and interpret and process these signals in our brain. We have to teach our children who use and rely on hearing technology to attend and help process these sounds as well. So listening is really a joint effort of the ear and the brain working together. You might have questions about how you'll know what listening skills your child needs to learn. We've developed an app at MED-EL called the Auditory Skills Checklist. And this app is a simple checklist with multiple choice response that allows you to monitor the auditory skill development for your child. It also includes some scoring so that you can track progress and can generate reports so that you can share those with professionals. I'm happy to say that following this webinar and for the week after, the full version of this Auditory Skills Checklist app will be available to you for free through the iOS and Android stores. And Donna will share more with you at the end of the webinar about how to access that. So let's dive into our listening strategies. We can talk about listening first. Now, this is a strategy where we are trying to take that auditory world that may have been sitting in the background for your child and bring it front and center to their focus. I find that this strategy is very powerful when used effectively because it builds your child's attention, their eagerness and anticipation. But it can be tricky for those of us who are used to using other means of communication, perhaps because your child wasn't hearing so well in the past. So let's talk specifically about listening first and how it might look. Here's a quick example. Look, here comes a duck. Hi, duck. Quack, quack. So that's a really simple example of where I said what was coming so that you could listen before you saw it. There's some specific techniques that might be useful to you when trying to integrate listening first into your everyday communication. Now, remember, as we're talking about this particular strategy, we're not forgetting the strategies that were covered previously. So we want to be mindful of background noise, and we may need to come closer to our child. When we do come closer, you want to resist the temptation to tap or to wave to gain their attention. Maybe you had to do these things in the past because your child wasn't hearing as well. But now, if your child has hearing technology that is well and appropriately fitted, give them the opportunity to listen first. An easy way to do this might be just calling their name. For example, I might say something like this, Anisha. So you say it once and then wait. The waiting is the key to making this strategy effective. It gives your child time to think about what they've heard. It's more effective than doing something like this. Anisha, 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 when we call multiple times, we're not giving the brain time to think about what it's heard and process that signal. We do know that children with hearing loss typically need a longer period of time to reflect on what they've heard and respond appropriately. Also, when you're calling multiple times, you may also be teaching your child unconsciously that they can expect to hear things more than once, and they may not always need to listen the first time around. So that's one way to build listening first into your routine. Another way is to simply say before you show or do something, much like I did with the duck. You see here this paper bag. Maybe I brought home some sweets or something to share with my child. I'm going to talk about that before I do it. Look, I have something in my bag, some sweet biscuits, yummy. Let's have a sweet biscuit. And then I'll take it out and show it. So that's another way to do it. Therapeutically, I always enjoyed using boxes or bags, things like that, to help me hide toys or objects so that I could remember for myself to put listening first. Another way to do this is to say before you do something. So for example, it's time to leave. We need to get in the car. Where are my keys? Something like that. So, more than just using listening first when you're reading to your child or doing an activity at the table with them, it's really important that you think of this strategy as more a way of communicating with them in your day-to-day life. An easy way to do this is to remember to talk about the plan, the thing you're about to do next. When that's done effectively, it really helps build that anticipation and eagerness, and it creates and develops auditory attention. So here's an example. Oh, it's really hot outside. It's so hot, it's quite sunny. I think I need my sunglasses. Oh, thank you. But you know, it's super hot. It's so hot, I think I need my sunscreen. Here it is. But really, it's very, very hot. I think I need my scarf. Now I'm all ready to go outside. So you can have a bit of fun with this. It's really quite easy to do, but it does take some time maybe to break bad habits of using our hands while we speak. So I want to hear from you. Let's chat about it. What are some ideas that you have or some things that you've already tried to use listening first with your child in everyday life? Please share some ideas, because I think we'll all learn from that and get some new information about creative ways to try this strategy at home. So I'm going to take some time and wait here. Oh, I see someone's mentioned baking as a way. Yeah, there are many steps in baking, so you can talk ahead and talk about, oh, we need the flour. Let's find the flour and go grab that. We need some water. Let's get that. I want to drink water. Where's my cup? This is my cup. So I like that you followed the "this is my cup," the "where is" the question with a statement, "this is my cup." Remember, we want to talk more, avoid questions, and provide that extra communication. Reading a storybook. This is a great way. Yeah, you can look at, say the sounds. You want to remember to say that before you show it, either before you turn the page, or you can use a flat book. Flat books are really helpful for talking ahead. It's dark, let's turn on the light. Well, that is really putting listening first if it is dark. I like these ideas. Great. So, you know, I like to use things from, oh, we've got someone talking about an orange in the fridge. talking about the bath time. There are many routines, and I like that you're thinking of routines. Like I said, you can use things you have immediately in your home. I keep boxes or bags handy to keep things in, but I also save everyday materials. So things like a simple paper towel roll can be used to talk about an action with the young child. Let's pull it. We need to pull, pull, pull. Or, you know, with older children, when I'm planning an activity, I might use some things like beans. Beans are really good to hide toys in and say, oh, I have something here that you can use for soup. And inside I've hidden a spoon, a soup spoon, and you can use that to discover some things. We've got many, many ideas coming up on the chat. The routines after the meals, let's clean it up, wrapping toys with paper. I really appreciate all these ideas, you guys, so I hope those will be helpful to all of our attendees today. All right. So you might have the question in your mind, well, if I listen and I wait, what do I do next, particularly if my child does not understand? And for that, I want to tell you about a strategy called the auditory sandwich. This is what you can use to help your child when they are having difficulty processing the message. So remember, when we ask a question or when we give a direction, it's sort of like a test. And depending on how they do, we might need to provide them with some additional support. That's the teaching component. So this is a great strategy for teaching. How might we offer that support? Well, there are many ways, and it will depend on your child and what's familiar to them. A really common concept of teaching is taking something that is unknown, maybe that's the spoken message, what they heard, and putting it with something that's familiar. And for your child, that might just be a gesture, a look, a glance, pointing, a sign if they know sign language, or cued speech, okay? So there's many different ways that this can look. You might remember from our last session that Rebecca introduced to you Bella. And so I'm going to give you an example with her using the auditory sandwich. And just remember that the auditory sandwich has these two components of listening. So we say it first, that's the listening first. Then we add the content of the message if the child hasn't understand. So that can be, like I said, some kind of touch. It can be a gesture of some sort, an open hand, for example. And then we want to take whatever the message was that we added that cue to, and we want to put it back into listening. And that's the bottom piece of that sandwich. And really, that's the most important piece. Why? Because when we have to provide some kind of additional cue, we want the last thing your child remembers to be not what they saw or what they felt, but what they heard. Okay, so it might look a little something like this. So let me try giving you an auditory sandwich first that uses a gesture and a look. Bella, it's time to sit down. Bella, it's time to sit down. That's right, Bella, it's time to sit down. So hopefully Bella understood after I gave that look or gesture cue. Maybe we should try one with cued speech. How about that? Let's try, Bella, let's wash hands. Bella, let's wash hands. Yes, Bella, let's wash hands so we can have a snack. So you see there that we're adding the listening, then we're giving some kind of content to convey the meaning if it was misunderstood or not understood, and then we're always following up, always, always, with putting it back into listening. And remember that wait time still has to be a part of this sequence, because that's really going to help them reflect on what they heard and give them time to understand the message. All right, so that concludes our first two strategies. Rebecca is going to share with you 2 more strategies to help promote your child's listening skills and development. So I'm going to turn the floor over to her now. Rebecca?
Okay, thanks, Anisha. I really enjoyed your demonstration of listening first and the role play with your glasses and scarf. That was terrific. Hello again to everybody joining us from your homes in Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. This week, I'm going to be talking to you about 2 new strategies, auditory hooks and acoustic highlighting, along with...
Excuse me, Rebecca.
Yes?
I'm sorry, Rebecca, I'm going to interrupt you because we have a question and it's an important question, I think.
Sure, go ahead.
So, one of our attendees has asked, can you please speak about the use of cued speech and signing?
Okay.
So if you could tell us
That's
about how we
Anisha's
use...
basket. Yeah, I'll leave that to you, Anisha, hey?
All right, so as you know, I think many of you will be familiar with assigned language, which is a different mode of communication. It usually has different grammar than spoken English, so different word order and things of that nature. Cued speech, for those of you may not know, though I expect many of you will, is also a manual communication style, but it's based on spoken language. Okay, and so as I'm cueing the syllables, syllable by syllable, each word. Now, when it comes to integrating these different types of communication approaches with the strategies that we've discussed, it depends on your goal. But when your goal is to build and promote your child's listening development, we always want to begin with listening first and support that with cued speech. Or with a sign, if that's what your child is familiar with. Now, if you have specific questions about what cued speech might look like or more about that, or I can certainly talk about that. I'm not an expert in sign language, so I don't know that I would be qualified to speak about that. But I do think the auditory sandwich is really a vital piece to help bridge those 2 communication modes for children with hearing loss. And so if your child doesn't or didn't have full access to sound through their hearing technology, or perhaps didn't have hearing technology, cued speech is a great alternative to promoting their phonological skills and their reading development. And then as you use and begin to learn and teach your child spoken language, you can marry those 2 together using strategies like we mentioned, like the auditory sandwich. So I hope that was helpful.
Hey, thanks very much. Thanks very much for the answer, Anisha. Can I turn back to you now, Rebecca? Thanks, to carry on.
Yeah, sure. So I think I've got around to talking about the 2 strategies that I will cover, which is auditory hooks and acoustic highlighting. In addition, I'll be showing you or introducing you to the resource that you will receive following this webinar. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll begin by talking about auditory hooks. Wow. So wow, uh-oh, look and yay are all examples of auditory hooks. They're called that because they hook your child in through listening. And every time that happens, your child's auditory cortex, that part of the brain, is activated. Imagine if we were all standing around waiting for, say, a running race to begin, and all of a sudden the starter blew the whistle. Well, we'd be going, hey, we weren't ready. We needed some warning. And that's why starters will use auditory hooks like on your marks, because those auditory hooks get your brain ready to listen to what comes next. So using auditory hooks helps your child become alert to listen and teaches their brain to respond through listening. We use auditory hooks to capture a child's attention, and we can also use auditory hooks to re-engage their attention if they've sort of drifted off physically or maybe just zoned out a little bit mentally. Play sounds, sometimes called learning to listen sounds, are a type of auditory hook that really kickstarts the auditory cortex. They are an easy start to listening because of the exaggerated duration, intensity, and pitch. Let me give you an example of what I mean by contrasting duration, which is the length of sound, intensity, which is the loudness of sound, and pitch, which is information about the frequencies of the particular sounds. So we'll invite Bella back to help. Listen, Bella. Moo. Oh, Bella, you heard the cow say moo. So moo is an example of a long duration sound. It's got low frequency or low pitch information and it's quite loud. We'll contrast that with listen, Bella. Quack, 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 quack. Oh, you heard the duck. So quack, quack is a short duration sound. It's got high frequency information in some of the speech sounds, and it's quiet compared to moo, which was quite loud. So play sounds can be used for beginning listeners to create a bridge to understanding words because we can pair them with actual vocabulary. But auditory hooks are not just for beginning listeners. If we go back to this slide and imagine using an auditory hook with little Sophia here, she's older and has more sophisticated language, so we might use an auditory hook such as, hey, would you look at that? Or maybe we would say, look out, if we thought there was some danger ahead. So now seems like a good time to introduce you to your free resource that you'll receive following this webinar. As with last week, you'll receive it in 3 formats. The PDF you can print to make an interactive book. So this is something you will make with your child. You can make your own story. You can make it reusable so that you can make a different story each time you do it. It's called It's a Long Way to the Shop, and it's about this little girl who lives on an island and it's such a long journey for her to get her shopping done. Let's have a look inside the PDF. So for each page in the PDF, it describes part of the little girl's journey, and your job is to identify which vehicle she will use for this part of the journey. When you're making the book with your child, it's a good idea to take it in turns to choose the vehicle. In this way, you'll be able to practice the strategies that Anisha introduced you to, that was listening first and the auditory sandwich. Let me show you how that might go. So it's my turn to pick. And she has to get from this beach to the forest. I can see some water there, so I think she'll have to travel on the water. I think she'll need the yacht. Yes, I think she's going to sail the yacht. So here, the scissors have acted as that middle part of the sandwich to create support for comprehending the new vocabulary, yacht. And watch me cut. So the next thing that has to happen is that additional layer of listening to establish that connection, the auditory connection to the new vocabulary. Here comes the yacht. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh goes the wind in the sails of the yacht. So as you can see, there's no text in this book. This allows you to create a story to meet the language level of your child or any specific goals you're working on for your child. Try using language that's just a little bit above what your child is using spontaneously. This will help show them the next step up for their language. For a beginning listener, you might like to do something like add a play sound with each of the vehicles. That might sound something like, oh, she's going in the rowboat. Row, row, row your boat. For a child with a bit more experience, you might like to focus on attaching a different verb. for each one of the vehicles. So the yacht sails, but the rocket zooms. And for an advanced listener, you would try to make more complex sentences and add in more story elements. For example, every Tuesday she gathers her basket and sails her yacht all the way across to the forest. Like last week, you'll receive the slide decks in two formats, so one with animations and one with no animations. For those of you new to the webinar series, slide decks are PowerPoints made using the text and images from the story. You can load it onto a laptop, tablet, or even a mobile phone. The slide deck version of this resource tells the story of which vehicle she chooses for each part of her journey. And the fun part is the choice of 3 from each page, trying to guess which one she chooses. Animations can be viewed using PowerPoint on laptop or the PowerPoint app on Android devices or Keynote on Apple devices. So let's have a look inside the slide deck now. It's a long way to the shop. Oh, so she has to get from her island all the way over to the beach. I wonder how she will travel. She might travel by submarine and dive deep down into the water. She might travel by car, but I don't see a bridge for her to drive on. Oh, she might travel by helicopter and fly up through the sky over to the beach. Let me think. I'll take a guess and I'll guess helicopter. Oh, she chose the submarine, but how exciting she gets to dive down into the water. Go, submarine, go. And she safely arrived at the beach. All right, those of you who joined us last week, you know the drill because this is your page to guess. How will she travel from the beach to the forest? Will she travel by cable car, up in the sky, along the cable, up in the air, or by rocket, zooming up into space, or by bicycle? All right, I'm going to check your answers in the chat. Actually, I don't think I can see the chat while I'm in this screen, inside the screen. So Donna, can you read out some of the answers for me?
Rocket, bicycle, rocket. Oh, rocket's popular. Bicycle, rocket. Lots of people choosing rocket.
Everyone's hoping for the rocket. Go, rocket. Let's see how she's going to travel. Oh, the rocket would have been great, but she chose the bicycle. Thanks everyone for your guess. Maybe next time you'll get it right. All right, go bicycle, go. And she has arrived safely at the forest. So I really like this slide deck. There's so many different things you can talk about. You can see this slide deck in use in a lesson I taught recently using telepractice. So we have created a recorded webinar to help therapists around the world who had to suddenly start delivering lessons remotely over the internet. This webinar is free for all to watch and it's available on our Medel Academy. And there's a very cute piece of video in it of little 4-year-old Bertie, who is a bilateral cochlear implant user. And he absolutely loves to guess how she will travel between along her journey. Information about how you can access that webinar will be sent to you with the resources. So last week I mentioned that you can customize the text in your slide deck, say if you're using a language other than English with your children. There might be other reasons that you want to customize the text. For example, in Bertie's lesson, I customized the text to say, what will she choose? So to customize the text, when you open the slide deck, you're going to select Edit Anyway, and then you will click in the text box. delete that text and simply type in your version. So that brings us to our last strategy, acoustic highlighting. The interesting thing about acoustic highlighting is that it's a strategy used by parents in every language all over the world. Maybe you remember back to the days when we were allowed to travel to other countries. And you could tell, even if you weren't looking and you didn't understand the language, if you were listening to adults talking to young children. That's because of this distinctive acoustic highlighting. Back in the days when we were less politically correct, we used to call this way of talking to young children motherese. And then somebody rightly noticed that fathers talk to their children too. So we changed and we called it parentese. Now this way of talking to young children, the acoustic highlighting, is referred to as child-directed speech. And it's universally used because it develops the child's auditory cortex. Remember that diagram Donna showed you last week with that pink shaded area of the brain. So there's lots of different ways of doing acoustic highlighting. If we think about our strategy being our plan, then the way we achieve our plan is we refer to as our techniques. So there are lots of different techniques to acoustically highlight a word or a speech sound. Firstly, you can sing what you say. Well, that simply means use more pitch variation and maybe emphasize rhythm. Of interest to those of you who use a tonal language with your children, for example, Mandarin, this is an effective strategy, an effective technique for calling your child's attention to the tone, which can change the meaning of a word. Studies show that parents of children with typical hearing use an overall slightly higher pitch and a greater variation in the pitch on tones for the first 18 months of their child's life. Then that's gradually reduced over the next 6 months. So this is a really important technique for those of you who are using Mandarin with your children. Other techniques to try, you can put the keyword or a new word at the end of a short phrase or sentence for beginning listeners. We know that children attend to and remember that last piece of information that they hear. That's the easiest for them. But you can also use this strategy for an experienced listener if you wanted to really pull their attention to new vocabulary or a new concept, or you're working on a particular speech sound. You can try saying important words a little bit louder. But remember last week we talked about how speech can become distorted if you speak too loudly. Maybe try using a whisper on an important word. Changing the intensity or changing the loudness will capture your child's auditory attention. Speak at a slightly slower rate and pause just before an important word. So here's an example of acoustic highlighting. I think there's a bear in that box. So how about now, Bella and I will show you how to put strategies together. While you watch, I want you to type into the chat box any strategy you notice me using. So think about the 4 strategies we did last week and the 4 new strategies that you've been introduced to today. All right, so I'm going to get Bella into the picture for you. All right, there she is. Oh, she's a little bit wobbly. Bella, turn and face the camera, my darling. Okay, here we go. Oh, here it is. Bella, I found your cup. Oh, we put it in this bag down at the park. Here's your cup. I thought we'd lost your cup. Here we are. Let me bring out your cup. There it is. Oh, you look so thirsty. It was very hot at the park. I'll get you something to drink. Here's some milk. I'll pour it in your cup. Watch me pour. Shh. All right, you have a drink from your cup. Can you hold it by yourself? Oh, look at you holding your cup. You're such a big girl. Have a drink from your cup. All right. I wonder how everyone did. Anisha, maybe you can read out some of the strategies that everyone noticed.
Well, quite a few people noticed listening first and your use of auditory hooks like oh, and they also noted that you said and used acoustic highlighting and talk, talk, talk throughout. So people were noticing quite a few of the strategies that you've mentioned.
Wonderful.
Rebecca, there was a question.
Oh, yes.
Rebecca, there was a question about repetition. Mm-hmm. So can we consider repetition a part of acoustic highlighting?
I think that's a perfect way to think of it. Repetition is a really valuable tool. It's another strategy, really. Last week we had a question about the 16,000 word goal per day. And the question was, do I have to think of 16,000 words, different words? And the answer to that was no. And in fact, repetition is really beneficial. We know that children with hearing loss who are using hearing technology to learn to listen and speak, they require much more repetition to learn and consolidate vocabulary than children with typical hearing. So repetition is your friend. I think you got all of the strategies. There was an important one that you probably didn't notice because my room is so quiet. I had already taken quite a few measures to reduce background noise before I started this webinar. In a moment, I'm going to hand you back to Anisha, who will summarize the strategies for us from today. But in Australia, tomorrow we are celebrating Mother's Day. So I just wanted to wish Happy Mother's Day to all the mums who joined us today. And with that, I'll say goodbye and see you next week.
All right, so I'd like to summarize before we finish the strategies that we covered in this week's session. So we talked about listening first as a way to bring the auditory world to the forefront. And we also mentioned the auditory sandwich as a way to help your child when they don't understand by adding some support. Rebecca highlighted for you the importance of auditory hooks to grab your child by the ear and get their attention, and the acoustic highlighting as a beneficial means of teaching them and helping them focus on the key words and important language in your message. So I hope these strategies will be helpful for you when you're trying to promote your child's listening and spoken language development. I'm going to turn the floor over to Donna so that she can summarize everything that we've learned in this series so far.
Okay, thanks very much Anisha and Rebecca for our great webinar today. I really enjoyed it and I hope everybody else did too. Now I'm just going to pop up onto the screen all of the strategies that we've talked about so far in our 2 webinars, particularly for those of you who weren't able to be with us last week. So you'll remember that in our first webinar, we talked about background noise, keeping that level of background noise as quiet as possible. We refreshed today that idea that the technology should be on all the time. Come close to me is a strategy that some people noticed Rebecca was using again with Bella today. We're remembering to be nice and close to the technology. And talk, talk, talk is something that we've discussed quite a bit as well. Okay. Now this week things are going to happen a little bit differently for you. So what we're going to do is we're going to email all of you, and on that email you're going to receive a short survey. And this is because we really would like to get your help as to what it is that you would like to hear more from us, what it is about the webinars that you're enjoying the most, and any ways that you think we can improve our service to you. So into your email will come a link to the survey. When you've completed the survey, then you will be sent an email with all of the things we've talked about today. So there are 3 special resources that you're getting from us today. One is the ebook and slide deck, just as you did last week. That lovely story that Rebecca showed us today of the little girl making her way such a long way to the shops. You'll also receive a link to the app. You'll remember that at the start of the webinar, Anisha mentioned our app called the Auditory Skills Checklist. And as she said, that app is going to show you each of the skills your child needs to learn in their listening development. The third thing that you will receive is a link to the webinar about telepractice that Rebecca mentioned. As she said, in these days, we've suddenly got many therapists who are having to deliver their therapy online via telepractice. So Rebecca has written some special resources to support therapists in that way. And the webinar will show therapists how to do that via telepractice. So this is what happens again. We email you with a survey link. You complete that short survey for us, and then you receive all the links for the free resources. Now here again is our email addresses. So you'll remember last week we gave you our email addresses for any questions. It's been fabulous hearing from some of you through those emails. We're getting back to you as quickly as we can. So please, those email addresses are still there for you and available for you. Now we had a few questions through the chat function as we went along, asking about how people can watch this webinar broadcast later. So it's available in 2 places. It's available at the Hear Life Malaysia Facebook page and also at the Hear Life Singapore Facebook page. So if you're a member of one of those Facebook pages, just pop onto there and you'll be able to watch our webinar live, our webinar recorded. So those are the 2 places that you can find it for those of you who asked. Now, what about next week? So next week, we're going to focus more on the child talking. We've thought about hearing, we've thought about listening a lot today. Next week, we're going to focus more on the aspects of talking. And again, we want to bring you lots of practical ideas for developing your child's talking skills. You will receive another lovely ebook and slide deck of Rebecca's to help with this. And also, we will, as usual, cover 4 strategies to help you in this way. We've also decided that next week we're going to have a bonus strategy and a bonus resource to go along with that. So I really hope you'll join us next week and talk with us some more. So it just remains for me to say goodbye to you all. Thank you so much again for joining us. And please remember, if we weren't able to answer your questions on the chat today, email us and we will do so. Great to see you again, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.